She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand, hold up on she frack. I wanna she grandson to the market. Them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Cockacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cockacrow, dagaba, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Cockacrow, dagaba, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. Inaga jackass yard to fetch the load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side. A Rexy and Rover from the farm, them a come. So now
On the farm, them a go. On the farm, them a go. I always like these things because early morning in the countryside, you see these images. You see a man or a woman or a man and a woman, maybe his wife, maybe his daughters. They're going to the farm. And always behind them is always a dog, either Rover running behind or in front, because that dog knows exactly where he or she is accompanying its owners. And so this song brings back lots and lots of memories, lots and lots of memories. But we're not here for memories and so forth and so on. A quick question, though. Good night to you, President Granger. How are you?
Good evening. Good to be back on the program.
I think I've asked you this question before. Have you had that experience when you were on the quarantine as a youngster? Baghdad experience, going to the farms and so forth, maybe with friends?
No, I must admit I was very young then, but my family was not in the farming business. We went into the quarantine or into Bartico on a different mission, but we were not resident farmers in the villages. But I've seen people who go about their day-to-day business, and you're quite right. The villages were rooted in farming because people fed themselves. And I always remember my own days in the quarantine because I became familiar with a lot of foods that were not available in Georgetown. People had houses, even though the houses were not, mansions. They always had somewhere to live. I cannot recall seeing people on the street or sleeping on the downs. And people went to school. Children went to school. Skulking was, of course, there was some occasional skulking, as we used to call it then. But if an adult, regardless of whether you were related to him or her or not, if an adult saw you out of school during school hours, you were in for some correction. And so those were the pillars of village life. And I witnessed that. I appreciated that. The farm was very important. You ate what you grew. The children went to school, and people had a home to live. There were no homeless and destitute people. And Sunday, among the Christians, people went to school. And of course, there were mandirs and masjids, and regardless of your religious belief, religion was a really strong feature in rural communities, much stronger than I think it is now. And you wouldn't think of not going to church on Sunday, regardless of which denomination you came from. So those were the four pillars, and I learned that lesson, as a child on the quarantine. And I'm glad to see that those four pillars have held rural society up. So you're quite right. Village life in the country are very important foundations for the modern Guyanese nation.
Thank you so much. As you're talking about Sundays, whether it's the churches, the mandirs, or wherever people go, the masjids. I always wondered why the roads are so empty, hardly had any cars. And if I were an older guy back then, maybe I would have set aside my car, hire a car, that is, for Sunday. and scrape up all of the passengers and make it. But then again, people just respect on that day of worship, whether it's a Sunday or whether it's a Saturday, for those who are Sabbath um, folks or 7 days Adventist folks as well. So, yeah, so this song brings back lots and lots of memories. Skulking. Oops, let's not go that route, please. Good night to all of our listeners, wherever you are, whether you're in the quarantine, whether you're in Bartica, wherever, Georgetown, Linden, Lethem, West Coast Demerara, West Coast Berbice, Weldad, and all those villages. Good night to all of you. Tonight we are talking about the media because I know wherever you are in Guyana, you have access. Most Guyanese have access to television or maybe the radio. And sometimes it can get so turned off because you're being fed with things that you know are unacceptable. But that's another story. Tonight's topic, we are dealing with the public has been fed, and just as we've been saying there, the public has been fed a diet of information, interpretations, and explanations of public events by the state media over the past 5 years, from 2020 to 2025. Much of the information, and listen to this carefully, guys, much of the information, however, concerns only the performance of the People's Progressive Party, only the performance of the PPP, and they ignore opinions, actions from civil society, non-governmental organizations, and the parliamentary opposition. So what the PPP is doing, which is what this program is about, which is exactly what it's about. They use the state media with your tax-paying dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars from you, the taxpayers. And what they put out in the state media is propaganda, pro-PPP stuff. They don't want you guys to hear anything else. Nothing else, nothing from the opposition, nothing from non-governmental organizations, nothing from civil society, well, except if civil society, some members of civil society praising them and so forth. Outside of that, nothing else is allowed via the state media. That's undemocratic. So tonight's discussion is just about that. Let's get straight into the first question on Anansi Web Education. What constitutional guarantees are there to ensure media freedom in Guyana? Sir?
Well, it's the Constitution is the guarantee because it states quite clearly that no one should be hindered in his or her freedom of expression, or freedom to receive ideas, freedom to communicate ideas. So the ultimate guarantor is the Constitution, but it's not enforceable. You cannot actually go to the police station and say, report that you were prevented from speaking at a public meeting, unless there's some physical violence involved. I think people are likely to ignore that. So it's not an enforceable provision of the Constitution, but it is something which is desirable. It should be aimed at. That is, the government should ensure that people do enjoy that freedom. But I would say that it is an expression of the Constitution, but I think guarantee, the word guarantor or guarantee is strong. This is what the Constitution says. It's very specific. Except with his own consent or her own consent. Except with his own consent, no person shall be hindered in the enjoyment of his freedom of expression. That is to say, freedom to hold opinions without interference, freedom to receive ideas and information without interference, freedom to communicate ideas and information without interference, and freedom from interference with his or her correspondence. That's what the Constitution says. I don't think you can improve on that definition, that the Constitution says you're free to receive ideas and freedom to communicate ideas. And are we in this program, Anansi Web Education, AWE, is a means of fulfilling that role, is a means of satisfying people's desire or people's need or people's right to receive information without interference. Nobody should interfere with AWE, at Anansi Web Education. Nobody should obstruct That is what the Constitution says, but it's not enforceable. People cannot queue up at the police stations and the law courts to say that they have been impeded or obstructed in the right to freedom of education. So it calls on the conscience of the public, of civil society, and of the government itself to make sure that nobody is obstructed or hindered in communicating ideas. So that is the answer to the question. But as you can guess, it is not something that is easily enforceable in modern society.
And under the PPP regime, you cannot expect anything good coming out of state media, just propaganda upon propaganda upon propaganda. Kudos to your administration, who introduced radio stations in communities so that individuals will be able to communicate and in their own languages, so to speak, and understand what's happening in the wider society. And kudos. Unfortunately, all we see now is a bunch of propaganda through those very small radio stations in the communities and so forth. And some people, especially those in the PPP, see that as democracy because their interpretation of democracy is to control the people. One-sided news, propaganda news, that's what people are getting, and people are just simply tired of it. Next question. Sorry, I don't want to get too worked up tonight, but why has the PPP been reluctant to implement measures to control the state media? While we already there are folks out there who know the answer to that, but I'll just repeat it again because I'm smiling. We all know the answers, but we want to hear it directly from you, President Granger. Why has the PPP been reluctant to implement measures to control the state media?
Well, it is a strange question because the PPP already controls state media. The PPP is not interested in hindering what the state media is doing. The PPP has under the office of the Prime Minister something called the Department of Public Affairs, and that department directs or controls the NCN and the GNNL and the radio stations. So the PPP knows exactly what it's doing, and it is satisfied with the way the state media are being run. And so the PPP is not going to change this. We are now in an election year, and what you see coming out of the state media in the era of the Soviet Union, it used to be called agitprop. It used to be called agitprop. And what we're seeing basically is propaganda. We're not seeing fair news. We're not seeing balanced news. On the one hand, we have the opposition saying or doing something, and on the other hand, we have the government. You're just seeing what the government is doing. And you show a picture there, but that picture was only exposed because the PPP was not then in office. But this is part of the record. This is part of the memory of the Guyanese people. This is what we saw on the 6th of March. This was what I call a clockwork demonstration on the 6th of March when these so-called riots erupted in 6 rural areas simultaneously and shut down in those 6 areas. So we had riots in West Babis, riots in East Quarantine, riots in West Demerara, and it was a clockwork arrangement. But it only came to the public view because the PPP was not then in control of the state media. But since it has gotten in control of the state media, you will not see any hostile actions by the PPP, any disruption of the peace. You'll see only criticisms of what the opposition is saying or doing. You would not hear or see what useful contributions the opposition has made. Exactly, for example, during the budget debate, you'll only see negative reports, and sometimes these negative reports are just innuendo. They're not factual. So that is the situation we have in this country now, and the PPP doesn't want to control it because the PPP feels it is working for them, and they feel that in the end, the public will have a negative view of the opposition, not a balanced view, but only a negative view. That is what is taking place.
And especially with this individual they have there controlling the media for the PPP, And we can only conclude that nothing good can come out of this situation here. Absolutely nothing good at all. Just propaganda, lies, innuendos, and vulgarity. Because apart from the state media, they create these sort of blogs where millions of taxpayers' dollars are being spent to spread their propaganda on the various names and all manner of things. But when you have a country that has such an individual with a criminal background and no respect for the rule of law, no respect for democracy, what else can we expect? But we can do better, and we will do better. Third question. Who is the PPP administration, or who in the PPP's administration has responsibility for managing the state media? I may have preempted that question, hence this.
Well, what they do know is that the Prime Minister has responsibility.
And not to cut you, President Granger. You said the Prime Minister. I almost, for some reason or the other, forgot that Guyana does have a prime minister. But go ahead, sir. Sorry.
The Prime Minister has responsibility in the allocation of offices. As early as 2020, he did make certain statements about the role of the state media. But I don't know at what stage the department was formed, but there's a Department of Public Affairs, and there is apparently a junior minister within the office of the Prime Minister who is responsible for public affairs. And it seems from reading the newspapers that on a day-to-day basis, on an everyday basis, it is this department which runs the state media and which plans courses and which is the spokesperson. I don't think that the department actually runs the press conferences, because sometimes we see some guests being appointed as the coordinator or the mediator for the press conferences. But the Prime Minister's office, the OPM, Office of the Prime Minister, has responsibility for managing the state media. And for better or for worse, that's where it is. That's the best answer I can give you. But I think that the responsibility has been passed on to the Department of Public Affairs, which doesn't specifically mean public communication, but it's called Department of Public Affairs.
All right, headed by an individual that is known not in a positive light in Guyana, and then we can't expect anything good coming out of the state media, coming out of DPI or whatever, or Chronicle. Absolutely nothing good. Garbage in, garbage out every single day. Next question, President Granger. Where is Guyana position on the World Press Freedom Index?
Well, there are two ways of looking at this, because many people in the PPP administration will complain that there is no empirical evidence, there is no yardstick. So they may say it's a question of perception. But I would say that in the World Press Freedom Index, Guyana is ranking 77th, which means that the freedom of the press is limited. The press is not completely free in Guyana. And this index is compiled by opinions, it is compiled by reports, it's compiled by assessments made by independent observers as to how free the press is in Guyana. So I would say that the position of Guyana is poor compared with other Anglophone Caribbean countries, Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, and Antigua, and so on. So we're very low. We're at 77th position, and I think if your son came home from school, with a report stating that he brought 77th, you would want to, correct his conduct, correct his behavior. So it is very low, and it is based on people's perception. It is difficult to measure with a yardstick whether the press is free or not, but this is the perception that the opposition conduct or performance in the parliament, which is the National Assembly, is not fairly reported on. That sometimes language is used to describe, opposition parties, opposition personalities, and the policies put forward by the opposition. Language which is not fit, in a modern democratic state. Offensive language, which is not fit to be published. And people make a very careful note of this. In addition to that, there have been incidents, recent incidents too, not only historical incidents. Historically, we know that the PPP in office actually prevented state advertisements from being published in one newspaper. When other newspapers were getting a lot of those state advertisements, we know that the PPP in office actually shut down a television station because it disagreed with its comments. This is not surmise. This is not. There's real evidence. We know that a journalist a television journalist was actually killed, and the killing was related to the comments he made on his program. And so, in terms of advertising, in terms of assault, in terms of tolerance, we know that quite recently some members of the media, accredited members of a certain private newspaper, were attacked when they made some comments at a PPP rally. And the Guyana Press Association has been the source of much of this information in the public domain. They made these reports, and the international media, the IPI and the International Press Organization and so on, are aware because Guyanese make these reports. And Guyana is not an island where these things would go unnoticed. These reports are made to international organizations. And if you read the comments in things like the United States State Department reports on freedom of the press, you would see that this is not an isolated comment, but the PPP doesn't care. You can't carry the PPP government to court, and the PPP realizes that they can go ahead and do what they want to do. So the World Press Freedom Index, as far as we are concerned, is a good guideline to the freedom of press in Guyana. And that freedom is directly related to what the Constitution calls for, that no one should be hindered. But if you have reporters going to a PPP conference, performing their functions as reporters, and being assaulted or insulted, then you can see that there is an attempt to hinder freedom of communication. And this is what is taking place. If you kill a journalist, you're preventing him from communicating with his audience. If you deprive a newspaper of advertisements, you're hindering their ability to communicate. If you conduct state media in such a way that every attempt to express your opinion is criticized in very harsh language, not fair and balanced criticism, but very rude, insolent language, sometimes by high government officials, you can see that these are attempts to hinder freedom of expression. So I would say that the assessment by that gives Guyana 77th position in the World Press Freedom Index is a good guideline, and that we are not doing well. We are not regarded as a state in which there is full freedom of expression in terms of what the Constitution has decreed and in terms of what the people expect in 2025. We are not a state in which there is full freedom of expression.
Certainly not a state full freedom, not a state that we can see any evidence of full freedom of expressions. Private media houses are still starved of ads. And just throwing a personal something here, since 2020, bench operator has been starved of any sort of ads, any ad, period. And there are other private media entities, I suspect, just to give just an example as to how the PPP operates. You did mention journalists being killed, TV journalist, then the banning of another journalist for over a year or 2 years from state media, any sort of press conferences when Jack Deere was the president, and lots of things. And then the banning, removal of state ads to Stabrook News, to Kaiser News, and of course to other entities. Those are some dangerous things that happen under the PPP regime. We're still seeing signs of those. State media, private media, starved of ads and being forced to sell their businesses, their TV stations or their radio stations to maybe people who are pro PPP. And that's what's happening. You also mentioned the 77 ratings of the World Press, and the fact that Guyana is not at a good position at 77. And if they are to rate themselves at that, it is absolutely unacceptable. And you also mentioned, President Granger, kids going home with a report card, bringing 77, and out of maybe 77 kids or 78. My experience on the quarantine, I smiled when you said that, because they have some families there with about 5 or 6 or 8 kids going to school. And one day we heard of a story of a guy, a son, brought last. And the father was very happy. And the mother couldn't, and nobody in the village understood why the father was happy and was so proud of his son that brought last. He said, a couple of my kids bring first, some bring second, some bring third. But the one that brought last gave him an indication as to who will be taking care of the cows and the sheep. And so I just recall that, but this 77 is no good
Yes.
space at all. But the PPP is proud of that.
Well, maybe if the dad was a pig farmer, he knows taking care of the pigs.
Speaking of pig farmers, as we go to the fourth, I believe, what is it? The final question for tonight is, how effective has the Guyana Press Association been in challenging the state media?
It is a difficult question for me to answer. I would like to start by saying the Press Association is 80 years old this year. It was formed in 1945. And in fact, that logo you see there was designed and printed for the first time at an office at 143 Ornock Street, Queenstown. That is the origin of that logo. And you can see the 4 digits 1945 clearly at the bottom. The Guyana Press Association was formed in 1945. It is 80 years old. But quite recently, we have seen a struggle either to diminish the role and the influence of the Press Association or to take over and control it. So there has been a fierce battle by some media houses and some persons to take control of the Press Association because it was perceived that the Press Association was a public nuisance and it wasn't complying with the PPP's agenda for media control. People were outspoken and people were actually enjoying their constitutional freedom to express their views. And the media houses should be allowed to do that. And I am convinced that the Guyana Press Association performs that role. I mean, when I was in office, I didn't agree with everything they said or did. And in fact, I often made recommendations that they should be given access to further training or improvement of the skills and so on. But that does not mean to say that they should be subject to exclusion or they should be subject to any form of discrimination. And the Guyana Press Association is necessary. And I'm convinced that the outside world is better informed about what is taking place in the media landscape in Guyana because of the Guyana Press Association. I don't think the outside world could rely on the Department of Public Affairs in the Office of the Prime Minister to know what's taking place in the country. But because we have some elements of the media community which are free, and they publish freely, whether the government agrees with it or not, certainly during the 5-year tour, you can call it the 3-year tour of the Guyana Press Association, the APNU AFC administration from 2015 to 2018, because the last 2 years we were subject to a lot of restrictions because of the no confidence motion. But definitely the press, the free press, were critical of the APNU AFC administration. Well, we made no attempt to shut them down or deny them advertisements. But for 3 years, we were in office, but for the other 2 years, we had no such access to state funds. So I would say that the Guyana Press Association is an important bulwark in the war, the media memory wars. And people who look back to Guyana's history to see what has been taking place between 1992 and 2025, particularly those 28 years that the PPP has been in office. And when they look to see what is taking place now in 2025, how this campaign is being conducted, they will see that the state media have been weaponized. The state media have been weaponized to wage a war against the private media, against opposition parties, so that only one record is remembered. It's a war of memory. And the Guyana Press Association is perhaps, like a seawall, preventing, the state media from, flooding the entire community with disinformation. That's where we are. And we have to support the Press Association because it's an association of the free media. That's what I would like to say. It has not been as effective as some of us would like it to be, but it is all that we have. It is all that we have, and they are part of civil society, and they must be given an opportunity to express their views freely, and that is what they stand up for. And as I said, this is 80 years. They've been in existence for 80 years, and I just hope that they can be supported to continue their good work.
Thank you so much, President Granger. 80 years, the logo and all these things. People have a way of trying to change dates in history. The PPP is equally notorious at doing that. The logo, looking pretty good. 80 years, 1945. So many years indeed. President Granger, thank you so much for your time. It's not a good look in terms of the media, state media that is, and how it's being controlled by the PPP regime just for propaganda purposes. Others, for the most part, others are being shut out. There's no voice offered on the opposition side. There's no voice from the civil society, no voice from non-governmental organizations. So of course, if they are in speaking or singing the PPP's language, they will be offered a voice. Outside of that, there's no independent voice, none whatsoever. And that's really, really bad for democracy. Those of you who have joined us tonight, of course, you saw the images, and had it not been for the independent media houses, had it not been for the Guyana Press Association and so forth. And I agree with you, President Granger, that can more be done through the Guyana Press Association? Yes. Are they doing a good job? We can say yes, right here on 107.1 FM under the circumstances. And let's continue to encourage the members of the Guyana Press Association, the executive members and others. Kudos to you guys. President Granger, thank you so much for your time this evening. And I'm not going to ask you of 77 students in a class, what was your report card like? You can tell what was my report card, right? Close to the 70s. But were you excited when you got your report card, or you did like what I did, fold it up and put it in my back pocket?
Well, you speaking as a media operative or as a student? Well, as a student, I would walk home very, very slowly. But in the media, I would tell you that while I was running the magazine, the Guyana Review News magazine, in 15 years, I did not receive a single state advertisement. It's very difficult.
Not
not
a
one
single.
in 15 years. But
And
that,
that's what.
of course, it operated between 1992 to 2008 or thereabouts, 2005. So it was entirely during this period of agitprop, of state control of the media. And Guyana Review had no way, had no, not a single ad. Luckily, I was supported by some private businesses, but it was not enough. And eventually, the review was destroyed. But it was not meant to be an anti-state newspaper. But I think the PPP took everything that was not in its favor as being against it. I think the PPP's attitude to the media is quite straightforward. You either support the party or you don't get state support. The state was regarded as its own piggy bank. It's not regarded as a facility or as a resource for the entire Guyanese public. And I think this is going to happen to other independent media houses. You either toe the line or you are left out in the cold.
Yep, right. The brand of the PPP is just that. Hopefully, there are not any in the opposition who are like that as well, that can take constructive criticism. But we'll talk about that at another program right here on 107.1 FM, maybe on Straight Up. But for now, we thank you so much for your time, President Granger, as always. And thank you for what you did during your administration. A little bit hiccups here and there, but it's the nature, human beings. Maybe sometime we can talk about a little hiccups too, but not tonight. Right. But thank you so much. Give our regards to our First Lady, Sandra Marie Granger. And hopefully sometime soon you'll show us some photographs of your kitchen garden. We're waiting to see that, President Granger. What's happening? What's going on? But I know. It wasn't a question. It was just, yeah, it is. We'll see that kitchen garden sometime. But thank you all so much. All the folks out in Sophia, wherever you are, good night. And we'll see you back right here on 107.1 FM on Anansi Web Education. Same place, same time next week. Thank you. Thank you, President Granger.
Thank you and good night to you and your viewers.
Thank you, sir. And good night to all of you again.
I go down but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading. I'm a